The chapel was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. My wife's coffin rested at the front, surrounded by white lilies, yet no one from her own bloodline stepped forward to speak. Her children sat rigid, arms folded, faces carved with resentment, not grief. My name is Jonathan Pierce. Most people in Maplewood call me John. I own a small bookstore on Main Street, and until 6 days ago, I was Catherine Pierce's husband. Today, I'm just the man who loved their mother, sitting alone in the front pew, while her children's hatred pierces me from 3 rows back. I never expected to be a widower twice in one lifetime. The first time broke me. This time I thought I'd be stronger. But strength isn't what you need when the air is thick with accusation and the only sounds are whispers that stop when you turn around. She deserves better than this, Linda Carver, Kate's lawyer, whispered beside me. Her sharp features softened with something like pity. I nodded, though my throat had gone dry. Kate's pearl necklace gleamed against the satin lining of her coffin. She was wearing the blue dress she loved, the one that matched her eyes her children inherited but used only to glare at me since the day we married 5 years ago. Pastor Williams cleared his throat at the podium. Would anyone like to share memories of Catherine? The silence stretched. I watched Danny, Kate's middle child, shift in his seat, then cross his arms tighter. Laura, the artist who never visited, studied her fingernails. Becky, the eldest and most protective, whispered something to her husband. That made him nod gravely. Not one of them moved. The pastor looked around the chapel, discomfort evident on his face. Perhaps the family needs more time. My legs were moving before my mind caught up. I felt their hatred follow me as I walked to the podium on legs that threatened to give out. My hands trembled as I gripped the edges of the wooden stand. Kate was... My voice cracked, and I heard someone, Danny probably, scoff quietly. I swallowed hard and tried again. Kate was warmth itself. The lie felt strange on my tongue. Not because Kate wasn't warm, she could be in private moments, but because I knew her children would never believe it. To them, she was the woman who had remarried too soon after their father died, the mother who chose happiness with me over mourning with them. Every morning, I continued, inventing as I went, she would wake up early to make breakfast for anyone staying with us. She loved having the house full. Another untruth. Kate valued her privacy, her quiet mornings with just coffee and her thoughts. But I couldn't tell them about the real Kate now. They wouldn't listen. She laughed like sunshine, I said, and someone actually snickered. I saw Becky elbow Danny, though not to silence him. She was hiding a smile too. I kept going, painting a picture of a woman they claimed never existed. A mother who baked cookies and sang lullabies and never raised her voice. With each embellishment, the whispers grew, the disbelief more palpable. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday. I lied, knowing Kate relied on her calendar, app for even her children's birthdays. She kept photo albums of every milestone. Kate had boxes of unsorted photographs she always meant to organize but never did. My humiliation grew with each word, but I couldn't stop. Kate deserved someone to speak for her, even if I was making a fool of myself. Most of all, I said, my voice growing smaller, she loved her children. Everything she did was for you. That part at least was true. Despite their rejection, their cruelty, their refusal to understand her, Kate had loved them fiercely. She had wept over their absence at holidays, treasured the rare phone calls, and kept their childhood artwork long after they'd stopped sending anything new. I looked up to see Laura dabbing at her eyes, though whether from emotion or embarrassment at my display, I couldn't tell. She wasn't perfect, I admitted, finally finding honest ground. But she tried. God, how she tried. When I finished, the silence was different, heavier. I walked back to my seat, shame burning my face. I felt like an imposter at my own wife's funeral, trapped between honoring her memory and acknowledging the truth. Then I heard it, the sharp click of heels against the tile floor. Linda Carver stood up from her seat and walked straight to me, her navy suit immaculate, her expression unreadable. The room held its breath as she leaned down. "Congratulations, Mr. Pierce," she said clearly, her voice carrying in the silent chapel. That was her final test. Gasps filled the air. The chapel froze. Linda straightened and addressed the room. "As Catherine Pierce's, attorney, I have been instructed to proceed with the reading of her will immediately following this service. All interested parties are requested to remain." I sat there, stunned, as people began to whisper. Linda's hand rested briefly on my shoulder, a gesture of support I desperately needed as I caught Becky's suspicious stare, Danny's narrowed eyes, Laura's suddenly attentive posture. The rest of the service passed in a blur. I barely registered the final prayers, the procession past the coffin, the hesitant condolences from neighbors and distant friends. All I could think about were Linda's words and what Kate could possibly have planned. As the chapel emptied, leaving only Kate's children, their spouses, Linda, and me, I stared at the sealed envelope in the lawyer's hand. It bore Kate's handwriting, to be opened upon my death, after my funeral service. Linda motioned us to the small meeting room adjacent to the chapel. No one spoke as we took seats around the oak table. Kate's photograph smiled at us from beside a box of tissues no one reached for. "Before I begin," Linda said, her voice crisp and professional, "Catherine wanted me to play this." She placed a small recorder on the table and pressed play. And suddenly, Kate was with us again. "If you're hearing this," my wife's voice filled the room, "then I've left you all behind. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not sorry for what comes next." I watched her children's faces as their mother's voice, strong, clear, unmistakably Kate, continued from beyond the grave. For years, I've watched my family fracture. I've seen bitterness grow where love should have flourished. Today, that ends. One way or another. The recording paused, and I could almost see Kate taking a deep breath, the way she did before making an important point. "Let me tell you about my final test." Kate's voice was steady as it continued from the recorder. "I've asked my lawyer, Linda, to observe my funeral closely. I wanted to see who would speak for me, who would find it in their heart to remember me with kindness, not resentment." I watched Danny shift uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the table. Laura's fingers twisted in her lap. Becky's face remained stone. "I didn't expect perfection," Kate continued. "I just wanted honesty spoken with love. That was the test. Simple, wasn't it?" No one looked at me, but I felt the weight of their awareness. I, the outsider, the stepfather they despised, had been the only one to stand. "Now, Linda will read my will. Listen carefully. This is my final message to all of you." The recording clicked off. Linda opened the envelope with deliberate care and removed several pages bound with a blue ribbon, Kate's favorite color. "I, Catherine Elizabeth Pierce, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament," Linda began, her voice neutral and professional. "I revoke all previous wills and codicils." The formality of it struck me as so unlike Kate, who preferred directness. But then, death has its own protocols. "To my husband, Jonathan Pierce," Linda continued, and I felt the room's attention shift to me. "I leave our home at 247 Maple Avenue, the contents therein, and my 50% ownership stake in Cornerstone Books." I heard Danny inhale sharply. The bookstore had been my small business before I met Kate, but her investment had saved it during a difficult year. Her stake represented not just financial value, but the faith she'd placed in me when few others would. "Additionally," Linda said, "I leave to Jonathan the sum of $375,000 from my personal savings and investments to be used at his discretion." Laura made a small noise that might have been a laugh or a sob. The amount was substantial. Not a fortune, but enough to secure my future without them. "To my children," Linda continued, and the atmosphere shifted again, tense with expectation. "I leave conditional bequests dependent on the fulfillment of specific terms." Becky's spine straightened. "Conditional? What does that mean?" Linda held up a hand. "Please allow me to continue as written." She adjusted her glasses. "To Daniel Pierce, Laura Dalton, and Rebecca Lawson, I leave individual letters contained herein, which Linda will distribute momentarily. These letters contain personal messages and the conditions for receiving your inheritance." Danny leaned forward. "This is ridiculous. She can't do this." "She can, and she has," Linda replied coolly. Catherine was very specific about her wishes. I sat in silence, as surprised as they were. Kate had never mentioned conditional terms in her will. We had discussed the basics, that I would be provided for, that her children would receive appropriate shares, but nothing like this. Linda handed each of Kate's children a sealed envelope. "Catherine asks that you read these privately before we continue." The three siblings exchanged glances before opening their letters. I watched their faces as they read. Danny's furrowed brow, Laura's trembling hand pressed against her mouth, Becky's eyes filling with tears, she rapidly blinked away. Minutes passed in silence except for the rustle of paper. When they finished, none of them spoke. None of them looked at each other. Linda cleared her throat. Now, to continue with the will. To each of my children, I leave the following items of personal significance. To Daniel, your father's pocket watch, which he received from his father. To Laura, my mother's art supplies and my collection of first editions. To Rebecca, my grandmother's pearl necklace and sapphire ring. These were treasures, family heirlooms that Kate had kept separate from our shared possessions. Items she had shown me with stories attached to each. The watch that had timed the birth of each child. The paintbrushes her mother had used until her fingers could no longer hold them. The pearls her grandmother had worn on her wedding day. Additionally, Linda continued, I leave to each of my children the sum of $100,000 to be held in trust by Jonathan Pierce. The room erupted. Him? Danny stood so quickly his chair tipped backward. She's making him our trustee? Becky's voice cut through her brother's. This is unacceptable. He has no right. Please. Linda's voice rose above theirs. There are conditions attached to this bequest, as outlined in your personal letters. Laura spoke for the first time, her voice unexpectedly quiet. She wants us to spend 1 month living in her house, with him. She nodded toward me without making eye contact. I looked at her in surprise. This was news to me. Danny laughed bitterly. A month with Mom's replacement, that's her condition? Becky was scanning her letter again. Not just living there. She wants us to get to know him, to listen to his stories about her, to share our own. Her voice faltered. And if we refuse? Danny challenged. Linda's response was immediate. Then, as stipulated, the entirety of your portions reverts to Jonathan, to be donated to the literacy charities Catherine supported. The silence that followed was absolute. I felt sick. Kate had placed me in an impossible position, custodian of both, her memory and her children's inheritance. They would hate me even more now. Why would she do this? Laura whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I found my voice at last. Because she loved you, I said simply. And she was tired of the division. Danny scoffed. Easy for you to say. You get everything either way. I didn't know about any of this, I insisted. Kate never told me. Catherine was very clear, Linda interjected, that Jonathan was not to be informed of these conditions prior to the reading. Becky looked at me with suspicion. So what's your play here? You'll hold our inheritance hostage while we pretend to like you? I don't want your money, I said wearily. I never did. I just wanted your mother to have a family again. Well, she doesn't need one. Any more, does she? Danny snapped. Linda placed another document on the table. There is one final stipulation. The month begins tomorrow. You must all reside in Catherine and Jonathan's home for 30 consecutive days. If any of you leaves before the 30 days are complete, all 3 forfeit the inheritance. The siblings stared at each other in disbelief. All or nothing? Laura asked. That's not fair. Your mother believed in family unity, Linda replied. This was her way of ensuring it. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to process everything. Kate had orchestrated this elaborate plan without telling me. A final attempt to heal the rifts that had pained her so deeply. And now I was caught in the middle of it. When I opened my eyes, 3 pairs identical to Kate's were staring at me, blue, sharp, and filled with resentment. So, I said quietly, I guess we'll be roommates. The day after the funeral dawned gray and drizzling, a fitting backdrop for what promised to be the most uncomfortable month of my life. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the first knock came. I opened the front door to find Becky standing there, a suitcase at her feet and irritation etched across her face. At 42, she was Kate's eldest, with her mother's high cheekbones and the determined set to her jaw that I'd come to recognize as a warning sign. Jonathan, she said stiffly. Becky. I stepped aside. Please, come in. She wheeled her suitcase into the foyer, glancing around as though expecting to find changes in the 6 months since she'd last visited. There were none. I'd been unable to move Kate's things or redecorate. The house remained exactly as she'd left it. The guest rooms are ready, I said, gesturing toward the stairs. You can take your old room if you'd like. My old room hasn't been mine since I was 18, she replied coldly. Any guest room is fine. Before I could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. Laura emerged, her dark hair pulled back, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day. At 36, she was the artistic one, according to Kate, sensitive and perceptive, but prone to holding grudges. She carried a leather portfolio case along with her luggage. Hi, she said simply, walking past me without waiting for a greeting. Becky and Laura exchanged tight hugs. whispering something I couldn't hear. I busied myself with bringing in Laura's bags, giving them space for their private reunion. Danny arrived last, parking his BMW haphazardly behind my modest sedan. At 39, he was the most outwardly successful of Kate's children, a financial advisor with a perpetual chip on his shoulder. He walked in without knocking, a designer duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Let's get something straight," he announced without preamble. "We're here because Mom forced our hand. This isn't a family reunion." "I understand," I said quietly. "Coffee's in the kitchen. Help yourself." The three siblings migrated to the kitchen, leaving me to carry Danny's bag upstairs. I placed it in the third guest room, then took a moment to collect myself, sitting on the edge of the bed Kate and I had shared for 5 years. Her pillow still held the indent of her head. When I came back downstairs, they were huddled around the kitchen island, conversation stopping abruptly as I entered. The scene reminded me painfully of the early days after Kate and I married, the way they would close ranks whenever I approached. "I thought we could have dinner together tonight," I offered. "I make a decent lasagna." "We're going out," Becky said. "Family dinner." The implication was clear. Family didn't include me. "Of course," I nodded. "The house is yours to come and go as you please. The will mentioned sharing stories about Kate." Laura sipped her coffee. "We'll get to that. Eventually." I retreated to my bookstore for the afternoon, leaving them to settle in without my awkward hovering. Cornerstone. Books had been my sanctuary since long before I met Kate, a small, independent shop specializing in rare finds and secondhand treasures. I'd opened it after my first wife died, pouring my grief into creating a space where stories lived forever. Kate had walked in on a rainy Tuesday 7 years ago, looking for a first edition Steinbeck. I didn't have what she wanted, but I offered to find it. 2 weeks later, she returned to collect her book, and we talked for hours after closing time. 6 months later, we married in the small garden behind the store, with only Linda and the pastor as witnesses. Her children hadn't attended. "You're looking glum," said Mrs. Harmon, my part-time employee and full-time friend, as she shelved new arrivals. "The house guests settling in? As well as can be." "Expected," I sighed. "They hate me, Helen." "They hate what you represent," she corrected, climbing down from her step stool. "There's a difference." When I returned home that evening, the house was empty. A note on the counter informed me they'd be late and not to wait up. I made myself a sandwich and ate alone at the kitchen table where Kate and I had shared countless meals. The silence was deafening. I was in bed reading when I heard them return around 11, their voices carrying up the stairs, slightly louder than necessary, loosened by wine. "God, did you see his face?" Danny's voice floated up, like a kicked puppy. "Shh," Laura hushed him. "He'll hear you." "So what if he does?" Danny continued. "We're stuck here because of him. Because of Mom," Becky corrected, her voice lower but still audible. "This is her game, not his." I turned out my light and tried to sleep, their muffled conversation continuing downstairs. This was going to be a very long month. The next morning, I was up early, preparing breakfast out of habit. Kate and I had established our own rituals over the years. Coffee first, then toast, a shared newspaper, and quiet conversation before starting our days. Now I moved through the motions alone. Laura appeared first, her hair disheveled, wearing what looked like one of Kate's old college sweatshirts. "You're up early," she commented, pouring herself coffee. "Old habits," I replied. "There's toast if you'd like some." She took a piece, surprising me by sitting at the table rather than retreating to her room. We ate in silence for several minutes. "You didn't change anything," she finally said, looking around the kitchen. "No," I admitted. "I couldn't." "Mom always hated those curtains," Laura said, nodding toward the floral drapes. "She said they made the kitchen look like a grandmother's parlor." I smiled despite myself. She did. But they were here when we moved in, and somehow we never got around to replacing them. That doesn't sound like Mom. She was always changing things. "Not toward the end," I said softly. "She became more accepting of imperfections." Laura studied me, her expression unreadable. "In the house or in people?" Before I could answer, Danny appeared, his hair wet from a shower, wearing expensive loungewear that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Morning family meeting?" he asked, sarcastically grabbing coffee. Laura rolled her eyes. "Just breakfast, Danny." Becky joined us last, already dressed for the day in a crisp blouse and slacks, her phone in hand. "I need to make some work calls," she announced. "Is there somewhere private I can use?" "Kate's study," I offered. Second door on the right, down the hall. Mom's study, she corrected coldly, walking away. The day progressed with minimal interaction. I retreated to the living room with a book, giving them space to explore the house, to reconnect with their mother's things. Occasionally, I heard them upstairs, opening closets, drawers, conversations muted but intense. Around mid-afternoon, I found Danny examining the photos on the mantelpiece, mostly of Kate and me, a few of her with her children from years past. Not many recent ones of us, he observed. She kept asking for new photos, I said carefully. Christmas cards, vacation snapshots. He picked up a frame containing a picture of Kate and me in Paris, her smile wide as I kissed her cheek in front of the Eiffel Tower. She looks happy here. She was, I confirmed. It was our 3rd anniversary. Danny replaced the photo with deliberate care. You know, my father took her to Paris for their honeymoon. She always said it was magical. The barb was subtle but effective. I felt the familiar sting of being measured against a ghost I could never compete with. Kate's first husband, the father of her children, the man who would always hold first claim to her heart. She told me, I said simply. That's why I wanted to take her back. Danny looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. Why are you doing this? You've got the money, the house. Why put up with us for a month? Because Kate asked, I replied. And because she was right. This family is broken. She wanted it fixed. We're not broken, he scoffed. We're just not yours. That night, dinner was takeout Chinese food, eaten in uncomfortable silence, around the dining table. As I gathered empty containers afterward, Laura surprised me by helping. Did Mom leave you a letter too? She asked suddenly, handing me a soy sauce packet. No, I admitted. Just what was in the will. She nodded, seeming unsurprised. Ours were intense, personal. Kate was always direct, I offered. Too direct sometimes, Laura said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. She knew exactly where to aim. I paused in wiping down the counter. What did she say to you all? Laura's expression closed. That's between her and us. Of course. I'm sorry. She watched me finish cleaning up. You really didn't know about any of this, did you? The conditions, the month together? No, I said honestly. Kate kept it from me completely. Why would she do that? I thought for a moment. Maybe because she knew I'd try to talk her out of it. 1 week into our forced cohabitation, we had settled into an uneasy routine. The siblings spent their days working remotely from various corners of the house, while I split my time between the bookstore and home. Evenings were a careful choreography of shared spaces and minimal conversation. We were surviving, not connecting. On the 8th day, Linda Carver called to check in. How's it going, John? She asked when I answered the phone in Kate's study, a room I rarely entered since her death. About as well as you'd expect, I replied, glancing at the bookshelves Kate had organized by color rather than author or genre, a system that had always baffled me. Have you started sharing stories yet? Linda's voice held concern. That was an important part of Catherine's wishes. We've barely progressed beyond past the salt, I admitted. They're here physically, but emotionally. John, Linda's voice softened. There's something else you should know. Catherine left specific instructions about the pace of reconciliation. If substantial progress isn't made by the halfway point, 15 days, I'm supposed to intervene. A chill ran through me. Intervene how? I can't say yet. But knowing Catherine, it won't be subtle. After hanging up, I sat at Kate's desk, running my fingers over the smooth wood she had polished religiously every Sunday. The woman I'd married had been methodical, organized to a fault. These elaborate posthumous instructions were so unlike her, or at least unlike the Kate I thought I knew. My eyes fell on a cardboard box tucked under her desk, labeled simply family in Kate's precise handwriting. I'd noticed it while clearing out some of her things, but had left it untouched, assuming it contained mementos from before our time together. I pulled it out, surprised by its weight. Inside were photo albums, dozens of them, meticulously dated and organized. I opened the top one, finding pictures of Becky, Danny, and Laura as children with their father. Kate stood beside them, younger and smiling in a way I'd rarely seen. What are you doing? I startled at Becky's voice. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with suspicion. I found this box, I explained, not closing the album. I didn't know your mother kept so many photos. Becky approached, cautiously, as if the albums might disappear if she moved too quickly. We thought she got rid of these after Dad died. She kept everything, I said. making room as Becky sat beside me on the floor. Look. Together we paged through images of birthday parties, school plays, family vacations. Kate had documented everything. There were even report cards and finger paintings tucked between the pages. I made that in second grade, Becky said softly, touching a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a family of stick figures. Mom had it on the fridge for years. She kept it all, I repeated, my throat tight with unexpected emotion. She never showed me these. Becky looked at me sharply. Never? I shook my head. I knew she had photos from before, but not this. Not so many. She was silent for a moment, turning pages slowly. Why wouldn't she show you? I'm not sure, I admitted. Maybe she thought I wouldn't want to see them. Would you have? Becky challenged. Of course, I said. They're part of who she was. Laura appeared in the doorway, drawn by our voices. What's going on? Mom's albums, Becky explained, lifting one. All of them. John found them. Laura joined us. On the floor, her artistic eye immediately appreciating the care with which Kate had preserved these memories. God, look at Danny's hair in this one. Mom was always trying to tame those cowlicks. For the next hour, we sat among the albums, the sisters occasionally laughing at forgotten moments, sometimes growing quiet at particularly poignant images. Danny found us there, initially hovering at the periphery before curiosity drew him in. She took this the day I graduated high school, he said, pointing to a photo of himself in cap and gown. Dad had been gone 6 months. I studied the image of young Danny, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, Kate standing beside him looking both proud and hollow. She talked about that day, I said quietly, how proud she was of you for speaking at graduation even though you were still grieving. Danny's head snapped up. She told you about that? She told me a lot of things, I said. About all of you. How Laura won the state art competition with a portrait of your grandmother. How Becky organized a fundraiser for the animal shelter when she was just 14. They exchanged glances, clearly surprised that their mother had shared these stories with me. What else did she tell you? Laura asked, her voice neutral but her expression intent. Everything she could think of, I said honestly. On quiet evenings, she'd tell me stories about when you were growing up, the family vacations to the lake house, Danny's broken arm from falling out of the oak tree, Laura's obsession with horses, Becky's debate team victories. She remembered. All that? Becky asked, a hint of vulnerability creeping into her voice. She remembered everything, I confirmed, and she missed you every day. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, not to warmth exactly, but to something less hostile. We continued looking through albums until dinner time when Danny surprisingly suggested we order pizza together instead of separating as had become our habit. As we ate around the kitchen table, the conversation flowed more easily than it had since their arrival. They asked me how I'd met Kate, and I told them the story of the Steinbeck first edition, earning a small smile from Laura. That sounds like Mom, she said. She always knew exactly what she wanted. Including you, apparently, Danny added, but his tone lacked its usual edge. I was as surprised as anyone, I admitted. When she asked me to dinner after I found her book, I thought she was just being polite. Mom was never just polite, Becky said. She didn't waste time on things she didn't care about. The comment hung in the air, its implication clear. Kate had cared about me. It wasn't much, but it felt like the first acknowledgement that our marriage had been real. Later that night, as the siblings retired to their rooms, Laura paused on the stairs. Those photo albums, she said. Did you really not know about them? No, I said truthfully. There are still parts of your mother's life I never had access to. She studied me for a long moment. Maybe that's what this month is about. Access. The next morning I found Danny in the kitchen before anyone else, making coffee with the precision of someone who takes their routines seriously. I added water to the machine, he said without looking at me. Enough for everyone. It was a small gesture, but significant. The first time any of them had acknowledged that we were sharing a household, not just occupying the same space. Thank you, I said, reaching for mugs. By the middle of the second week, something had shifted in the house. The discovery of Kate's photo albums had cracked open a door none of us expected. While we weren't exactly friendly, the open hostility had mellowed into a cautious coexistence. Small connections formed through shared routines. Morning coffee, occasional meals together, brief conversations about Kate that didn't immediately turn bitter. On the 12th day, I returned from the bookstore to find Laura sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by stacks of books. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down my bag. "Mom's books," she replied, not looking up. "I'm trying to figure out what to do with them." I knelt beside her, recognizing volumes from Kate's extensive collection. She had been a voracious reader, our shared love of literature one of our strongest bonds. "She marked this one up," Laura said, handing me a worn copy of To the Lighthouse. The margins were filled with Kate's neat handwriting, observations and questions crowding the text. "She always wrote in her books," I said, running my finger along a particularly emphatic underline. "Said reading should be a conversation, not just consumption." Laura smiled faintly. "Dad used to get so mad about that. He thought books should stay pristine." "I know," she told me. Laura looked up sharply. "She did?" "She mentioned it once when I caught her writing in a first edition I'd given her." I smiled at the memory. I told her I agreed with her, that books are meant to be lived with, not just preserved. Laura studied me with new interest. "You really did know her." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I tried to. Every day. We spent the next hour sorting through Kate's books, Laura occasionally reading aloud passages her mother had marked, me sharing the context of when Kate had read them. For the first time, I felt Laura seeing me as someone who had genuinely loved her mother, not just an interloper who had stolen her away. "This was her favorite," I said, holding up a dog-eared collection of Mary Oliver poems. "She read from it almost every morning." Laura took the book, opening to where a dried lavender sprig marked a page. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" she read softly. "That's the one." I nodded. She said it reminded her to make deliberate choices. "Like marrying you?" The question held no malice, just genuine curiosity. "Like everything," I replied. "Your mother didn't drift through life. She navigated it." That evening, when Becky and Danny returned from a walk downtown, Laura suggested we all have dinner together. I offered to cook, and to my surprise, Danny volunteered to help. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, the silence between us felt less strained. "Mom said you were a decent cook," he commented, dicing onions with professional precision. "She mentioned your risotto specifically." "She exaggerated," I smiled. "But I do make a mean risotto." "She never exaggerated," Danny said matter-of-factly. "That was Dad's thing. Mom was brutally accurate." I nodded, remembering Kate's unflinching assessments of everything from books to people. True, though she could be diplomatic when needed. "Not with us," he snorted. "She always told us exactly what she thought." "Because she respected you," I offered. "She saved the sugar coating for strangers." Danny paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "Huh, I never thought of it that way." Dinner that night was the most relaxed meal we'd shared. The conversation meandered through safer territories. Books Laura was reading, a client Danny was advising, Becky's daughter's college applications. I mostly listened, watching Kate's children interact without the sharp edges that had characterized their earlier exchanges. After dinner, as I cleared plates, Becky followed me into the kitchen. "I need to ask you something," she said abruptly. I set down the dishes, bracing for whatever confrontation was coming. "Of course. Was Mom happy? With you?" The directness of the question shouldn't have surprised me. Becky was Kate's daughter, after all. I considered my words carefully. "I believe she was," I said finally. "We had a good life together. Quiet, maybe, compared to what she had before, but good." Becky leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "She changed after she met you. Got softer somehow." "Life softens most people eventually," I offered. "She'd been through a lot. But she was always so strong," Becky insisted. "After Dad died, she held everything together. Then suddenly she's remarrying, moving to a new house, changing careers." "She was still strong," I said gently. "Strong enough to choose happiness again." Becky looked away, but not before I caught the shimmer of tears in her eyes. "We thought she was having some kind of breakdown. That's why we fought the marriage so hard. We thought you were taking advantage." The admission hung between us, the first acknowledgement of their deliberate campaign against our relationship. "I know," I said simply. "She knew too. And she married you anyway." "She did." Becky wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed by her emotion. "I should check on Laura. She gets melancholy around Mom's things." After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen, processing this unexpected moment of vulnerability. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, but it was something. An opening, perhaps. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, restless after a night of fragmented sleep. I made coffee and carried it to the back porch, watching the sunrise over Kate's garden. The rose bushes she had tended so carefully were overgrown now, my gardening skills inadequate to maintain her vision. The sound of the door opening startled me. Danny stepped out, still in sleep clothes, his own coffee mug in hand. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Please." I gestured to the empty chair beside me. We sat in surprisingly comfortable silence as the garden brightened with morning light. "Mom loved it out here," Danny finally said. "Even as a kid, I remember her gardening whenever she was stressed." "It was her thinking place," I agreed. "Sometimes she'd come out with a problem and return with a solution." Danny nodded slowly. "Is that what this is? Her solution to us?" "I think it's her attempt at one," I said carefully. "Your mother wasn't perfect, but she hated leaving problems unsolved." "We were a problem to her," Danny said flatly. "No," I corrected. "The distance was the problem. She missed you. All of you. She could have called more, visited, made an effort. She did call," I said quietly. "Most of the time, you didn't answer." Danny stared into his coffee cup. "It was easier to be angry." "Then what?" "Than admitting we might have been wrong about you. About her choices." It was the most honest thing any of them had said to me. I let the words settle between us, neither accepting nor rejecting them. "I never tried to replace your father," I said finally. "I knew that wasn't possible, or desirable." "But you took her from us," Danny insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "I don't think anyone could take Kate anywhere." "She didn't want to go," I smiled slightly. "She chose me, yes, but she never stopped choosing you too." Later that day, Linda called again, asking for an update. I told her about the photo albums, the shared meals, the small conversations beginning to bridge our divide. "That's progress," she said approvingly. "But Catherine wanted more than polite coexistence. Have you shown them the letters?" "Yet?" "What letters?" I asked, confused. There was a pause on the line. "Check the bottom drawer of Catherine's desk. There should be a red folder." After we hung up, I went to Kate's study and found the folder exactly where Linda said it would be. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes, each addressed to one of her children in Kate's handwriting, with a note paper clipped to the front, to be given only when they're ready to listen. I stared at the envelopes, wondering what final messages Kate had left for her children, and how I was supposed to know when they were ready. That evening, I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, turning the red folder over in my hands. Kate had left so many messages, so many breadcrumbs leading her family toward reconciliation. I wondered if she had, anticipated her death somehow, or if this was simply her way of controlling things even beyond the grave. A knock at the open bedroom door pulled me from my thoughts. Laura stood there, a sketchbook clutched against her chest. "Am I interrupting?" she asked. "Not at all." I set the folder aside. "What can I do for you?" She hesitated, then crossed to sit beside me on the bed. "I found this in Mom's closet," she said, opening the sketchbook to reveal a charcoal portrait of Kate. Elegant, thoughtful, with the hint of a smile playing at her lips. "You drew this?" I asked, taking in the skilled lines, the perfect capture of Kate's essence. Laura nodded. "Years ago, before Dad died. I gave it to her for her birthday." "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "She looks exactly like this when she was reading something she loved." Laura touched the edge of the drawing. "I didn't know she kept it." "She kept everything you gave her," I said. "There's a box in her closet with every card, every gift." "She never told us," Laura murmured. "Would you have listened?" The question wasn't accusatory, just a simple inquiry. Laura seemed to consider it seriously. "Probably not," she admitted. "We were so angry after Dad died, when she met you so soon afterward." 2 years, I corrected gently. "It was 2 years after your father passed." Laura looked surprised. "Was it?" "It felt faster." "Grief distorts time," I said. "For all of you, I think your father's death was still fresh. For Kate, she'd been grieving longer than you knew." "What do you mean?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's not my place to speak for your mother. She can't speak for herself now," Laura pointed out. "And we're supposed to be sharing stories, aren't we? Isn't that the point of all this?" She was right. If we were ever going to move forward, some truths needed to be addressed. "Your father was sick for nearly 3 years before he died," I said carefully. "Kate was his caregiver. Throughout. She watched him decline day by day, handled his medications, his appointments, his bad days. By the time he passed, she had already done much of her grieving." Laura's eyes widened. "She never told us how bad it was. She always made it sound manageable. She wanted to protect you, I explained. All of you were building your own lives. She didn't want to burden you. So she carried it alone. Laura's voice was tight. That sounds like Mom. Not completely alone, she had a support group. That's actually where we first met, though neither of us remembered until our third date. Wait, you were in a grief support group too? I nodded. For my first wife, Caroline. She died of breast cancer 5 years before I met your mother. Laura stared at me. You were widowed before Mom? Yes. The admission seemed to shift something in her perception of me. Cancer's a cruel teacher, but an effective one. Kate and I both understood loss intimately. It gave us a shorthand others didn't have. We sat in silence for a moment, the revelation settling between us. Finally, Laura gestured to the red folder beside me. What's that? More messages from your mother, I said. Letters for, say, each of you. Her breath caught. May I see mine? I hesitated. Kate left instructions that they should be given when you're ready to listen. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I'm listening now, Laura said simply. I opened the folder and handed her the envelope with her name. She took it with trembling fingers but didn't open it immediately. Would you stay while I read it? She asked. The vulnerability in her request touched me. Of course. Laura broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in Kate's distinctive handwriting. As she read, silent tears began tracking down her cheeks. I sat quietly beside her, offering tissues when the tears became steady streams. When she finished, she folded the pages carefully and returned them to the envelope. She knew me, she whispered. Really knew me, even with all the distance. She did, I confirmed. She talked about you often. Your talent, your sensitivity, your courage. Laura looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. The letter. She explained why she married you. How you made her feel alive again when she thought that part of her was gone forever. I swallowed hard against the sudden lump in my throat. She also said you tried to get her to reconnect with us, that you pushed her to keep calling even when we didn't answer. Someone needed to be stubborn, I said with a small smile. And between the two of us, Kate had the market cornered. Laura laughed suddenly, a watery, genuine sound that reminded me painfully of her mother. That's exactly what she wrote, that you were the only person more stubborn than her. The moment felt precious, this shared understanding of Kate across the divide that had separated us for so long. She also wrote that she was sorry, Laura continued, her voice softer, for not being the mother we needed after Dad died, for retreating into herself, for not fighting harder to keep us close. She carried that regret, I acknowledged. She tried to make peace with it, but it was always there. Laura wiped her eyes again. I think I need to share this with Becky and Danny. That's your choice, I said, but they have letters too. Later that night, after Laura had sought out her siblings, I heard their voices from the living room, sometimes raised, sometimes breaking with emotion. I stayed upstairs, giving them privacy to process Kate's words together. Around midnight, a soft knock came at my door. All 3 siblings stood in the hallway, eyes red but expressions resolved. We'd like our letters, Becky said simply. All of them. I retrieved the red folder and handed them their envelopes. They took them solemnly, like receiving sacred texts. Thank you, Danny said. The first time he'd thanked me for anything, for holding these for us. Kate knew what she was doing, I said. She always did. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house had transformed. The siblings moved differently, spoke differently, as if some great weight had been lifted. At breakfast, they sat together at the kitchen table, talking quietly until I appeared. John, Becky called. Would you join us? I approached cautiously, still expecting the walls to go back up at any moment. We've been talking, she continued when I sat down, about Mom's letters. And we have questions, Danny added, things she wrote about that we'd like to understand better. If you're willing to talk about it, Laura finished. I looked at their earnest faces, so like Kate's when she was pursuing a truth. Ask me anything. For the next 2 hours, we talked, really talked, about Kate, about her illness that none of them had known about, diagnosed 6 months before she died, about how she'd made me promise not to tell them until after, not wanting her final months colored by pity or obligatory visits. She was going to tell you herself, I explained. She had a plan to bring you all here, to reconcile before, but time ran out faster than we expected. So this whole arrangement, Danny gestured around the house. This was her backup plan. I believe so, I nodded. Kate never left anything to chance if she could help it. Why didn't you tell us she was sick at the funeral? Becky demanded. Or after? Would you have believed me? I asked gently. Or would you have thought I was making excuses for her? The silence that followed was answer enough. In her letter, Laura said slowly, Mom wrote that you were the love of her life, that what you two had was different from what she had with Dad. Not better or worse, just different. I hadn't known that. Kate had never compared our marriage to her first, had never made me feel like a replacement or a second choice. Hearing that she had written those words to her children, words that must have been difficult for them to read, filled me with a bittersweet ache. She loved your father very much, I said carefully. She told me often about your family, about the life you all built together. I never wanted to erase that. We thought you did, Becky admitted. We thought that's exactly what you wanted. No, I shook my head. I just wanted to be part of her life. A new chapter, not a replacement, for what came before. Danny leaned forward, his expression serious. In my letter, Mom said you two had talked about inviting us all for Christmas, that you were planning to renovate the upstairs to make room for grandkids eventually. We were, I confirmed. Kate wanted family holidays again. She missed the chaos, she said. Why didn't she just tell us that? Laura asked, frustration edging her voice. Pride, I said simply. Hers and yours. Too many years of stalemate. The siblings exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Well, Becky said finally, she's certainly broken the stalemate now. The final week of our mandated month together brought unseasonably warm weather, as if nature itself was encouraging us to come out of our emotional hibernation. The atmosphere in the house had transformed, not to perfect harmony, but to something approaching genuine family. On the 24th day, I returned from the bookstore to find all three siblings in the backyard, attacking Kate's overgrown garden with determined energy. Becky was pruning roses with surgical precision, Danny hauled bags of mulch, and Laura carefully separated perennials that had grown, too crowded. What's all this? I asked, setting down my bag on the patio table. Intervention, Danny replied, wiping sweat from his brow. Mom would be horrified at the state of her garden. I told them you weren't much of a gardener, Laura added with a small smile. No offense. None taken, I chuckled. Kate tried to teach me, but I have what she called enthusiastic incompetence. Too much. Water, not enough water. The plants never stood a chance. Well, we can at least get it back in shape before we leave, Becky said, then paused as if surprised by her own words. The unspoken acknowledgement that our time together was drawing to a close hung in the air. I changed into work clothes and joined them, following their instructions and enjoying the easy banter that flowed between us as we worked. By sunset, the garden looked revitalized. Not perfect, but cared for again. We sat on the patio with cold drinks, admiring our handiwork as fireflies began to appear. Mom loved those, Laura said, watching the blinking lights drift over the freshly turned soil. She used to say they were nature's way of reminding us that even darkness has its beauty. That sounds like Kate, I smiled. She found meaning in everything. Even us? Danny asked quietly. Especially you, I replied. All of you were her greatest pride. Even when you weren't speaking to her. Becky set down her glass. We've been talking about what happens after next week. My heart stuttered slightly. Oh? The will specified 30 days, she continued, but it didn't say anything about what happens afterward. I nodded, uncertain where this was heading. True. We'd like to keep in touch, Laura said simply. If that's okay with you. Relief and surprise washed over me. I'd like that very much. Mom wanted us to be a family again, Danny added. Not just for 30 days. I thought that was the point of the inheritance, I said. To bring you back into her life, even if she wasn't here to see it. The money was just leverage, Becky said dismissively. Mom knew us too well, knew we needed a push. But now that we're here, she gestured around the garden. It feels right, somehow, being together. That night, I called Linda to update her on our progress. She seemed pleased but unsurprised. Catherine had faith this would work, she said. She knew her children better than they knew, themselves. There's just one thing I don't understand, I admitted. Why didn't she tell me about any of this? The letters, the conditions of the will. We didn't keep secrets. Linda was quiet for a moment. She worried you'd try to protect her memory, she said finally, that you'd smooth things over rather than let them confront their feelings honestly. She thought I'd sugarcoat things? She thought you loved her too much to let her be seen as anything less than perfect, Linda corrected gently. and she needed them to see her completely, flaws and all. The observation struck me like a physical blow. Kate had been right. I would have tried to present only her best side, to defend her against criticism. I would have hidden her illness, her regrets, her mistakes. I would have tried to protect a memory that didn't need protecting. The next morning, I found Becky in Kate's study, organizing the contents of the desk drawers. "May I help?" I offered. She nodded, making space beside her. We worked in comfortable silence, sorting papers, cards, and the various odds and ends Kate had accumulated. "I found these," Becky said suddenly, holding up a stack of small notebooks. "They look like journals." My heart skipped. I didn't know she kept journals. Becky handed me one dated from the year Kate and I married. "Maybe you should have these." I took the notebook but didn't open it. "No," I said after a moment. "They should stay with all of you. They're part of your mother's legacy, too." She studied me with an expression reminiscent of Kate's analytical gaze. "You really didn't know about them?" "Kate was entitled to her private thoughts," I said, "just as she was entitled to her plan for all of us after she was gone." Becky seemed satisfied with this answer. "We should look at them together then, all of us." That evening, we gathered in the living room. I built a fire despite the mild weather. Something about the dancing flames felt right for this moment of revelation. The siblings positioned themselves around the coffee table where the journals lay in chronological stacks. "Where should we start?" Laura asked. "The beginning?" Danny suggested, reaching for the earliest journal. "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Start with when your father got sick. That's when everything changed." Becky nodded, selecting a journal from the appropriate year. "I'll read." For hours, we listened as Kate's voice emerged from the pages. Her fears, her exhaustion as caregiver, her worry for her children, her gradual acceptance of loss. The journals revealed a woman more complex than any of us had fully acknowledged, stubborn and tender, practical and dreaming, sometimes angry, but always loving. When we reached the entries about me, I steeled myself for what might come. But Kate's words were a balm I hadn't known I needed. "I never expected to find love again," Laura read, her voice steady. "Especially not with a quiet bookseller who quotes poetry as easily as breathing. Jonathan doesn't try to replace what I've lost. Instead, he offers something new, a chance to be known completely without the weight of decades of history. It's terrifying and freeing all at once." Danny took over reading entries from after our marriage. Kate's joy in our simple life together, her continuing heartache over her children's distance, her determination to bridge the divide somehow. Then came the entries about her illness, the diagnosis, the prognosis, her decision to keep it private. "I don't want my illness to be what brings my children back," Becky read, her voice breaking slightly. "I want reconciliation that will last beyond my funeral. John disagrees. He thinks I should tell them immediately. But I know my children. Obligation would bring them running, but only truth will make them stay." The final journal entry was dated just 3 weeks before Kate died. "Linda helped me finalize everything today. The will, the letters, the conditions. John would be furious if he knew. He believes in direct communication, not posthumous manipulation. But some lessons can only be learned when there's no one to argue with. My children and my husband are the people I love most in this world, and they don't know each other at all. My last gift will be to change that, to give them the family they all deserve, even if I can't be part of it." We sat in silence after the last word was read, each lost in our own thoughts. It was Danny who spoke first. She planned all this, the funeral test, the month together, the letters, knowing she was dying. "And never told any of us," Laura added softly. "She was protecting us in her way," I said. "All of us." Becky closed the journal gently. "She always did think she knew best, didn't she?" "Though?" Danny asked with a sad smile. "Look at us now." The next day, our 26th together, I suggested we visit Kate's grave. We hadn't been back since the funeral, and it felt important somehow to complete this circle. The cemetery was peaceful, late afternoon sunlight filtering through ancient oak trees. Kate's headstone was simple, elegant black granite with her name, dates, and the line. "From Mary Oliver she had loved so much. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" We stood together, the 4 of us, around her grave. Laura placed fresh roses from the garden we had restored. Danny brushed leaves from the stone with careful fingers. Becky stood with her hand on my shoulder, offering support I hadn't realized I needed. "She would be pleased," I said finally. seeing us here together. Smug is more like it, Danny replied, but his tone was affectionate. Mom always did like being right. She orchestrated this whole thing from beyond the grave, Laura marveled. That's commitment. That's Kate, I corrected gently. She never left a problem unsolved if she could help it. Becky squeezed my shoulder. Including us. As we walked back to our cars, Laura linked her arm with mine, a casual gesture of familiarity that would have been unimaginable a month ago. What happens now, John? She asked. After the 30 days? I considered the question carefully. I think that's up to all of us. Kate gave us the push, but what we do with it is our choice. I'd like to come for Thanksgiving, she said. If that's okay, I'd like that very much. Christmas, too, Danny added, walking beside us. Mom's journals mentioned you have quite a collection of holiday books at the store. The finest selection of Christmas stories in 3 counties, I confirmed with a smile. And I make a decent eggnog. Spiked, I hope, Becky called from behind us. Kate's recipe, I assured her. Guaranteed to make caroling sound good. As we drove, home, and it was home now for all of us in different ways. I felt Kate's presence more strongly than I had since her death. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a continuing influence, a thread connecting us all. That night, I found a small package on my pillow, wrapped in blue paper with a note from the siblings. Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. Kate in her garden, head thrown, back in laughter, sunlight catching her hair. She looked younger, unburdened, absolutely alive. The note read simply, "Thank you for loving her enough to share her with us. B, D, and L." I placed the photo on my nightstand, where Kate's face would be the last thing I saw each night, and realized that somewhere along the way, grief had softened into something else. Not absence, but presence. Not loss, but continuation. On our last morning together, the 30th day, Linda Carver arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, her briefcase in hand and a satisfied expression on her face. We gathered in the living room, the space now comfortable with shared memories and new understanding. Well, Linda said, looking around at our expectant faces, I'm pleased to see everyone still here. Catherine would be very happy. Were you expecting otherwise? Becky asked. Linda smiled diplomatically. Catherine prepared for multiple outcomes. She was nothing if not thorough. That's an understatement, Danny muttered, though his tone was fond. Linda opened her briefcase and removed a large envelope. As you've fulfilled the terms of Catherine's will, 30 consecutive days residing together, I'm authorized to release your inheritance immediately. However, before I do, there's one final message Catherine asked me to deliver. She produced a DVD in a clear case. She recorded this 2 weeks before she passed. She asked that you watch it together once the 30 days were complete. My heart contracted painfully at the thought of seeing Kate again. Her voice, her expressions, her living presence. The siblings exchanged glances, similar emotion evident on their faces. Would you like me to stay? Linda asked gently. No, I decided. This should be just family. Linda nodded as if I'd passed some final test. She handed me the DVD, then distributed checks to each of Kate's children, their promised inheritance now secured. With a few final words of congratulation, she left us to our private moment. I inserted the DVD with trembling hands and took my seat between Laura and Becky on the sofa. Danny perched on the armchair, leaning forward intently as the screen flickered to life. And there she was, my Kate, sitting in her study, wearing the blue cardigan I'd given her for our last anniversary. She looked tired but determined, her blue eyes bright despite the shadows beneath them. Hello, my loves, she began, her voice strong despite her fragile appearance. If you're watching this, then 2 things are true. I'm gone, and you've all managed to live together for 30 days without committing murder. I'm proud of you for the latter. A collective chuckle rippled through us, tinged with tears. I know you're probably angry with me, Kate continued, for the secrecy, for the manipulation, for forcing you together this way. I understand that, but I'm hoping that by now you understand why I did it. She paused, collecting her thoughts. Family was always the most important thing to me. When I lost Michael, I thought I'd lost everything. Then I found John. Her eyes softened as she looked directly at the camera, as if seeing me across time, and discovered that love doesn't diminish when shared. It multiplies. I felt Laura's hand slip into mine on one side, Becky's on the other. My greatest regret, Kate continued, is that I couldn't bridge the gap between the people I loved most. I tried. perhaps not hard enough or in the right ways. So I'm trying one last time from beyond the grave, which I admit is a bit dramatic. Her familiar wry smile flashed. Briefly. John, she addressed me directly. You were my second chance at happiness. You taught me that life doesn't end with loss. It just changes shape. Thank you for every quiet evening, every shared book, every moment of peace. I'm sorry for not telling you about my illness sooner. I wanted to protect you from another long goodbye. Tears streamed freely down my face now. Kate had apologized in person too in those final weeks when denial was no longer possible. But hearing it again, seeing her face as she said it, was both painful and healing. Becky, my firstborn. Kate turned her attention to her children. So responsible, so protective of everyone around you. You were always trying to fix what was broken, including me after your father died. I needed space to grieve in my own way, and you needed me to grieve in yours? I'm sorry we couldn't meet in the middle then. Know that I have always admired your strength and your fierce loyalty. Becky's grip on my hand tightened. Danny, my son, Kate continued, her expression softening. So much like your father. The same humor, the same ambition, the same heart underneath all that bluster. You felt his loss perhaps most keenly because you were still becoming the man he taught you to be. I know you thought my remarriage was a betrayal of his memory. I hope you understand now that hearts are more spacious than we think. Danny wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. Laura, my sensitive soul. Kate's voice grew tender. You express in art what others can't even feel. That gift makes you vulnerable, and I know my choices hurt you deeply. You retreated into your work just as I retreated into mine. I've kept every piece you ever created. They're my most treasured possessions. Your talent wasn't the only thing I admired. Your capacity for empathy will heal this family if you let it. Laura leaned her head on my shoulder, her tears dampening my shirt. To all of you, Kate addressed us collectively again. I leave my most important possession, each other. The inheritance money is nice, I'm sure. A mischievous smile played at her lips. But the real wealth is sitting in that room with you right now. The stories you've hopefully shared, the memories you've recovered, the new connections you've formed, those are my true legacy. She took a deep breath, and I could see the effort it cost her to maintain her composure. I don't know if you've forgiven each other yet, or me. That may take more time. But I hope you've at least begun to see each other clearly. Not as rivals for my affection or as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but as the extraordinary, flawed, loving people you all are. Kate looked directly into the camera again, her gaze seeming to meet each of ours individually. Life is too short for walls between hearts that should be connected. That's the lesson I learned too late. Don't make my mistake. Keep talking. Keep trying. Keep loving each other. Even when it's difficult, especially then. She smiled one last time, that full, radiant smile that had first captured my heart in a small bookstore on a rainy afternoon. I love you all, always. Now go build the family we should have been. All along. The screen went dark, but none of us moved to turn it off. The silence that followed wasn't empty, but full, of emotion, of understanding, of possibilities. Finally, Danny spoke. She always did have to have the last word. The tension broke as we laughed through our tears, recognizing the truth in his observation. Kate had orchestrated this final moment just as she had arranged. Everything else, with precision, insight, and unmistakable love. Later that evening, after we'd all had time to process Kate's final message, we gathered on the back patio. The garden glowed in the setting sun, the roses we'd pruned already showing new growth. So, I said, looking at each of them in turn, what happens tomorrow? Technically, we could leave, Becky said. The 30 days will be up. Mom's lawyer gave us our checks, Danny added. Conditions fulfilled. Laura looked thoughtful. But that's not really the point, is it? The money, the 30 days, those were just the structure. The scaffolding, I suggested, not the building itself. Exactly, Laura nodded. The building is what we do next. I need to get back to work, Becky admitted. And my husband is probably wondering if I'm ever coming home. Same, Danny agreed. But that doesn't mean this ends. No, I said with conviction. It doesn't. We talked late into the night, making plans that would have seemed impossible 30 days ago. Monthly dinners, holiday gatherings, a summer trip to the lake house Kate had loved. Not obligations, but opportunities. Chances to continue what Kate had started. The Next morning, as suitcases appeared in the foyer and cars were packed, the mood was bittersweet. Becky was the first to leave, her schedule as precise as ever. "This isn't goodbye," she said, hugging me tightly. "It's just until next month. I'll have dinner ready," I promised. "Kate's lasagna recipe. I'll bring dessert," she countered. "And John? Thank you. For loving her. For loving us, even when we didn't deserve it." Danny left next, his handshake transforming into an embrace that would have astonished the man who had arrived 30 days ago. "Take care of her books," he said gruffly. "And yourself." "I will," I assured him. "Drive safely. Call when you get home." Laura lingered, helping me straighten up the house that suddenly seemed too large, too quiet. "I'm thinking of moving back to Maplewood," she said casually as we washed breakfast dishes. "There's a little studio space for rent downtown. I could be closer. For dinner nights and holidays, you know." Joy bloomed unexpectedly in my chest. "That would be wonderful. Plus, someone needs to help you with the garden," she added with a smile. "Mom would never forgive us if we let it go to ruin again." When Laura finally left, I walked through the house alone for the first time in a month, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of our time together. Danny's coffee mug in the dish rack, Becky's reading glasses on the side table, Laura's sketch of the garden pinned to the refrigerator. In the study, I found the photo albums neatly arranged on shelves, the journals carefully boxed and labeled. On Kate's desk lay a new album with a note in Becky's handwriting. "For the next chapter." Inside were photographs from our month together, moments I hadn't even realized were being captured. The four of us in the garden, covered in dirt and laughing. Danny and me cooking dinner, deep in conversation. Laura showing me her sketches of the roses. Becky asleep on the couch, a book of Kate's. Poetry open on her chest. The final page held a group selfie taken in front of Kate's headstone, our faces solemn but peaceful, connected by shared loss and newfound understanding. I added the photograph of Kate laughing in the garden, the one they had given me, to the last empty slot in the album, the past and the present together, making space for a future none of us had imagined possible. That evening, I sat on the back porch with a glass of Kate's favorite wine, watching fireflies dance over the garden we had restored together. "You were right," I said aloud to the empty chair beside me. As usual, the breeze stirred the wind chimes Kate had hung years ago, their gentle melody a fitting accompaniment to the moment. "They're extraordinary, your children. I wish you could see us now." In the quiet that followed, I felt it. Not Kate's ghost or some supernatural presence, but the certainty that she had known all along how this would end. Not with grudging tolerance or polite distance, but with genuine connection, with family. Her final gift had not been the money or the house or even her carefully crafted messages. It had been the chance to build something new from the fragments of what was broken, a mosaic more beautiful for having been shattered and remade. As darkness fell completely, my phone chimed with incoming messages. From Becky. "Home safe. Mark says you're hosting Thanksgiving. No arguments." From Danny. "Back in Chicago. Found Mom's recipe for eggnog in my suitcase. Coincidence?" From Laura. "Signed the lease on the studio. Moving in next week. Need help with bookshelves. Volunteering your services." I smiled as I typed responses to each, feeling the threads of our new relationships strengthening with each exchange. Kate had orchestrated the beginning, but what happened now belonged to us. A family forged in grief, conflict, and finally, understanding. "The truth always appears," I murmured, echoing words Kate had often said. "Just not always when or how we expect it." The wind chimes answered with their gentle music, a reminder that some presences never truly leave us. They just change form, becoming part of the fabric that connects past to future, sorrow to joy, endings to new beginnings. Kate's legacy lived on, not in her possessions or her money, but in the reconciliation she had engineered with such determined love. Her final test had become our first step toward healing, and for that I would be forever grateful.